Now, both Greenland and Denmark have repeatedly said that the Arctic island is not for sale. Greenland's Prime Minister made it clear if they have to choose, if they ever have to choose between the United States and Denmark, they will choose Denmark. And yet President Trump remains adamant, even though Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov have said neither Russia nor China plan to annex Greenland. President Trump has refused to rule out the use of force. Will Davos pave the way for dialogue, diplomacy, or the use of force? Joining me on India First is Nela Jaksic. She's a geopolitical correspondent, joins us from Europe. Professor Andrew Latham is a distinguished scholar of international security and strategic studies, joins us from the United States. And Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar stays with me on this broadcast. Nela Jaksic, can Europe realistically ward off the Trump threat, or ultimately, if he chooses to use force, Europe will have to fall in line? Are there any expectations from this Davos meeting?
Briefly, before I touch on your questions, I just want to kind of state the situation the world is in today. I think we are watching a geopolitical theater, most definitely, where international law has become a simple formality. Every territory, it seems like it's open for grabs, especially when it comes to the question of sovereignty. And I want to kind of underline that. Not only international law has become a formality, it actually has become a piece of paper that nobody is abiding according to, although it exists. In respect to your question, I believe I kind of want to forecast about Donald Trump's and his administration's strategy, what could be in the future. I think Davos is just going to be a platform where he kind of reiterates his hardline stance that the United States has a major interest in Greenland. They're not going to back off until full ownership or full access of Greenland is transferred to the United States. Although we know that Denmark and the PM of Greenland have already said those are the red lines. So what's going to happen next? I believe diplomatic conversations are going to continue, especially some high-level working groups. But ultimately, Donald Trump is going to control the narrative. He's going to control the political leverage, and especially the escalation to the point where I believe Trump's administration is trying to avoid a military operation in Greenland. I don't think it's the same case scenario as in Venezuela, because here we have Europe and NATO involved. And I firmly believe that Trump's administration does not want to have a direct confrontation with NATO. So I think he's going to use his political economic leverage, especially his pressure with the tariffs upon Europe, Greenland, and Denmark. And what he's going to try to accomplish is a slow transition where the US does not openly attack Greenland, but kind of like with economic, political leverage, pressuring, and the keep going of diplomatic conversations, he's going to put Denmark and Greenland in a very, very difficult position, in a difficult spot where they're kind of like nudged to kind of change their position.
Okay, so let me bring in Professor Latham, because is this my way or the highway as far as Donald Trump is concerned? And should he pursue taking over Greenland by force, as he says he hasn't ruled that out? Would that mean the end of NATO? Because it's one NATO country not attacking Russia, but another NATO country for territory.
Well, a number of questions there that are all important. First of all, it wouldn't be unprecedented. Greece and Turkey have had their issues around Cyprus, for example. So, but it's the United States is qualitatively different as a player within NATO than either Greece or Turkey. So there's that. Another point that is raised quickly is that Ursula von der Leyen is wonderful when she stays in her lane. Look at the trade relations that she's negotiating with India. But she seems not to understand that Greenland withdrew from the European Union in 1985. And so this really is not her wheelhouse. And it's also a security issue. The precursor for the European Union originally was the European Coal and Steel Community and then the European Economic Community. It's not a security community. People should stay in their lanes. But the most important point I'd like to make is that this is classic good cop, bad cop negotiating. Trump is very good at playing the bad cop. He posts things, he says things about tariffs. But the people around him, Scott Bessent and Marco Rubio and people like that, are saying, what's really important here is securing Greenland, because it is important to North American and North Atlantic security. The Danes, the European members of NATO, have not done enough. They need to do more. This is an old American refrain, burden sharing. It goes back to the founding of NATO. And so pressuring, and not the one British soldier and 5 French soldiers and 3 German janitors or whatever they sent. That's not going to do it. It has to be a serious permanent rotation that's going to meaningfully enhance the security of Greenland and therefore North America, the North Atlantic. And of course, the United States under treaty rights has the right to increase its footprint on the island as much as it wants. It used to have 14 bases on the island at the height of the Cold War. Scaled it back to 1 right now, Patufic, but it could scale it up again. That's the law of the land. So
Sure,
there's no
but
real issue.
scaling up would mean securing Greenland, but not controlling it, not controlling territory, not owning real estate. But Nella Jaksik, Professor Latham has a very valid point. Before I bring in Ambassador Sajanhar, you cannot secure Greenland by sending in 1 military observer from the United Kingdom, 13 from France, 14 from Germany, 1 from Norway, 2 from Finland, if I have the number right. I mean, that would add up to 1 platoon strength, 35 soldiers. I mean, that's symbolic, right? But what is it all about? Does Europe pretend it is serious, but it knows it can't stand up to the US?
I actually believe that Europe is kind of giving psychological support to Greenland because ultimately it's going to come to what moves we should watch for next is the United States not doing open confrontations so much, but movements of transport aircrafts, naval assets, engineering units, or command and control infrastructure to the existing base of US and Greenland. I think this question is more important to watch of what's going to happen next than to see like the troops of Europe. Yes, I see that they're coming to Greenland to kind of secure, to kind of bring a political stance. But I think this is mostly psychological and political support rather than kind of ramping up for a big military operation against the US.
Okay, Ambassador Sajanhar, is there any justification for President Trump to take over Greenland as a NATO member? If there's a threat from Russia or China, he can deploy any number of troops and missiles and warships and submarines in the region, as was done at the height of Cold War, have a dozen plus bases. There were 14 in the past, but he wants the real estate. Look at that the AI map that's been circulated on Truth Social.
No, you're absolutely right. In my view, there is no justification whatsoever because according to international law, it is an autonomous territory and it's a part of the Kingdom of Denmark. And I think it's also been mentioned that earlier in the past, the United States used to have more than 10,000 troops on the island. Nothing stops it from having that many or even more. I think what the Europeans have said very categorically that its sovereignty is off the table. It is non-negotiable. Anything else and everything else can be discussed. And that is what, in fact, if you permit, I'll just make 2 points here. That, when we had the foreign minister of the Kingdom of Denmark and foreign minister of Greenland, they had a conversation with J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio in the White House a couple of days ago. And they said, okay, both of us reiterated our position. There are red lines that we have mentioned, and we have agreed to set up a working group, and we will continue our discussions. But lo and behold, on the same day or just the day after, Mr. Trump comes up with these 10% tariffs. I think from Europe, they would have thought that, okay, we have had discussions with the vice president of the United States. Now, obviously, what the vice president agrees to with the Europeans, that doesn't hold any value whatsoever. Because here, what it really brings up is that you don't know with whom you have to speak as far as the United States is concerned. Second point, Gaurav, second point, both the foreign minister of Denmark and Greenland, they said, we have not seen a Chinese ship or a Russian ship in the vicinity for the last 10 years. So I think all this argument about Russian and Chinese ships sort of, hovering around Greenland, that seemed to be very, very inaccurate, to put it very mildly. They
Okay.
also said that we have stopped the investments coming in from China. So I think this is basically like it was in Venezuela, it was for oil. Here it is for the real estate and for the critical minerals,
It's for
gas,
the
oil.
real estate, critical minerals is what you say. President Trump also indicated that psychologically it's very important for him to take control of Greenland. But Professor Latham, European Union by and large so far has given in to Trump since they depend on the US for security. But can a united EU stand up to Trump in your view? Can they use the trade bazooka as they talk about counter tariffs, or ultimately, in the American view, EU will fall in, or Europe will fall in line?
Well, there's no such thing as a solid front in the European Union. The Germans are already waffling around this. They don't want a confrontation with the United States. Certain countries in the East, Hungary, for example, they have no time for this kind of talk. Now, it's true that President Trump's rhetoric sometimes alienates the right of center base of some of these political leaders, whether it's in Britain or in the European Union. But the European Union is divided on this, not on ceding sovereignty, but on Trump and on the security importance of Greenland. And it's true that, by the way, that there are no Chinese naval vessels, but as the polar ice cap recedes,
Yes.
the Northwest Passage and the North Sea route, and indeed the entire North Atlantic/Arctic Ocean, these are becoming battlegrounds. The Chinese are developing the naval capabilities to operate under the ice and in the Arctic. They've declared themselves a near-Arctic nation. They've tried to purchase some of those old U.S. Air Force and Army bases. There's no doubt that in a gray zone kind of way, a hybrid threat kind of way, Russia and China are ramping up their ability to compete in the Arctic, which includes Greenland and Canada, and that the United States is it's waking up, it's beginning to react. Sometimes quite wisely in terms of the
Okay.
Arctic over-the-horizon radar in Canada, sometimes in a ham-fisted way. That's Trump's modus
So let
operandi.
me get Nella Jaksik to respond to that, and I want to show that map on the Arctic route that will open up once that polar ice melts. But Nella Jaksik, merit in the Americans saying the Chinese are lurking around, if not today, a decade from now. The way they're building up their navy, the way Russia is gaining ground in those Arctic waters. And this is a very important territory that links the North Atlantic Ocean and the Arctic Ocean. Europe not in a position to defend it. America can do it better.
I think when it comes to the question of America's national security, at this moment, I don't see like a realistic threat to it. However, I more think this is a political interest of the United States. However, the question of national self-determination of the people of Greenland is kind of backfired because the U.S. Has completely neglected this. It just seems like that this territory is very attractive at the moment for America's U.S. political interest, and it's open now for negotiation after U.S.'s Venezuela military operation.
Okay.
I do think the U.S. is kind of using its momentum, especially after Venezuela, to kind of bring up this question. What will happen in the next 10 years is very open to interpretation. Donald Trump and his administration is currently interested in Greenland. However, there are a lot of international laws to be broken. However, in the question of national sovereignty, Denmark and Greenland are not going to budge so easily, I think.
But do
So
international laws, like you yourself pointed out, do they even exist? The manner in which the Americans went into Venezuela, and not just now, look at what happened in Iraq, look at what's happened in Libya, look at what's happened across the world, the manner in which both the US and the Europe have behaved either in Africa or in Latin American countries or in West Asia. But Ambassador Sajjanhar, it's not just Greenland, it's also Canada that the AI map, it also shows Canada as part of United States in the same colors. What does that indicate, and can this transatlantic alliance survive if the US is no longer seen as a reliable partner? Canada always, already, is it charting out an independent course, especially with Mark Carney's interactions with the Chinese leadership?
Yeah, as far as it's not only Canada, let me put it this way, the whole world is charting a different course. Different course, those which had strong partnership, transatlantic partnership we've been talking about. Canada, you said, Mexico also, they've had this trade agreement. I think the whole world has come to realize that Mr. Trump flexes muscles. He cannot be trusted. He is a very uncertain partner. So all the countries are looking for diversification, and it's not only these countries. When we are talking about, let's say, the Arctic, as far as security of the Arctic is concerned, Gaurav, there are other countries also in the Arctic. The map that you had shown,
Yes.
Iceland also is a part of the Arctic where all these actions are taking place in terms of coming from the Pacific right into the Atlantic through the Arctic when the polar ice
Hmm.
melts. There is also Norway. It has a huge part of
Yes.
the Arctic. There is also Canada, which has a huge. It's not only Greenland, that Greenland is the one that is going to be impacted. But if you have to protect it, if you have to protect Greenland, I'm sure as Europe is concerned, they are very willing to cooperate and collaborate. That's the whole idea of, in my view, of the transatlantic partnership. It's
Okay.
as far as NATO is concerned, they work together whenever there is any threat. So why is it that you need to put Europe to one side and
So
the
let me
United
let
States
me
needs to
take that
come over?
question to Professor Latham, because President Trump's threat of 10% to 25% tariff against NATO allies over Greenland is being described in Europe as unprecedented. Will it work? Are there any voices in the US telling him that this move could be counterproductive? Why can't they work together on Greenland, sir?
One of the reasons why this has popped as an issue now is because President Trump is on the verge of losing his tariff powers. The Supreme Court is going to strike down his claims that he has that authority under various bits of legislation. So he's going to lose that. He's going to lose the House and the Senate maybe in November, the House for sure, maybe the Senate too in November. So he's not going to be able to do what he wants to do. But even now, if we concede that international law is more about norms than rules, American domestic law is very much about rules, and the president cannot annex anything, not even his own backyard. He
Backyard.
can't.
Yep.
Because
Absolutely.
it requires an act of Congress, and there's no appetite in this Congress, and there'll be no appetite in the next Congress. And so when President Trump leaves office in 3 years,
Okay.
the windows are all closing for him.
Okay, so 9 months to go for that November midterms. We'll be watching that very closely. Nela Jaksik, Professor Latham, and Ambassador Sajjanhar for joining me here on India Today. Many thanks.